And mythology is a compendium of metaphors. But when you understand a metaphor, use just, high school grammar language, when you interpret the metaphor in terms of the denotation instead of the connotation, you've lost the message. Mm-hmm. That's like going into a restaurant and reading the menu and then deciding what you're going to eat and eat that part of the menu. The menu is a reference to something transcendent of that piece of paper.
Good morning and welcome to this community webinar of the Joseph Campbell Foundation. Today, we're going to be inviting you to experience the power of myth at the movies. We've got a lot in store for you today, not the least of which will be exploring a few specific archetypes that have become common to our cinematic experiences. I'm so excited that you've decided to come with us today and go on this journey. So let's dive right in. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about Dorothy Gale from Kansas. I've been thinking about Indiana Jones. I've been thinking about Katniss Everdeen and Freddy Krueger and Mary Poppins. The archetypes that have appeared in our movies throughout cinematic history, they've changed the way that we see the world that we live in. And in them, we see who we aspire to be. We see who we fear. We see who we're searching for. And we see who we are. And in the end, that's really it, isn't it? Archetypes on the movie screen show us who we are, but they also show us who we could be, for better or for worse. While he was at Esalen in 1982, Joseph Campbell told a story about walking through Times Square in New York City and seeing this marquee of a theater announcing a film called Fire Women from Outer Space. And while most people passed that theater and thought, oh, what trash have they put on the screen now, Campbell looked up and said, now that is a mythological idea. Campbell, of course, recognized that this idea of fire women from outer space is a concept found in Tibetan Buddhism. Joseph Campbell was maybe not the most regular moviegoer, but when he did go, he tended to talk about it. He talked about the experience he had one afternoon when he and Jean wandered into a theater and saw Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the opening scenes just moved him in a deep way. He talked about the influence of the early adventure serials and what they brought up in him as he saw these characters and these archetypes move across the screen. Well, you probably are very aware that Joseph Campbell was not just aware of cinema, but Joseph Campbell has greatly influenced cinema as well. And while there are lots of different filmmakers and characters and archetypes in cinema that we could point to that Campbell had so much impact on, probably none is more known than those in the Star Wars cinematic universe. But we're going to be going beyond that today and looking at how we can experience the power of the myth in the movies through various archetypes that perhaps you haven't considered in your cinematic experiences before. We're going to be looking at three particular cinematic archetypes: the fool, the lover, and the trickster. We're also going to be looking at how these archetypes relate to Joseph Campbell's book, Creative Mythology. I'm going to have a lot more to say a little later in our webinar about creative mythology, but I'm very excited to introduce some ideas that Campbell introduced in creative mythology and how they connect to these particular archetypes in cinema. Finally, you really want to make sure you stick around to the end of our webinar today, because we've got some really exciting announcements and a promo code that you are not going to want to miss if you are looking to buy any of Joseph Campbell's books or any of his work, you really want to stick around to the end because we have something really special in store for you at the end of our webinar today. I am so excited to not only be the only voice on our webinar today, but to be engaging with some of the other staff and leaders here at the Joseph Campbell Foundation. And the most important people in this entire webinar, of course, are you. Those of you who are joining us from around the world, and we are so delighted that you are here with us. I would love to invite you as our community to put questions in the Q&A so that we can answer them. And of course, feel free to chat in the chat. We just ask that you keep that chat focused on the ideas that are being presented here in the webinar today. And I know a lot of people immediately jumped in and started doing this from the moment they came in the door today, which just thrills me. But I would love to know where you're joining us from and which of these archetypes is the uppermost in your psyche today. What's been rising up within you? What sort of archetypes have you been experiencing? And maybe you've seen a movie lately, or maybe you've seen a streaming show, and a particular archetype has really caught your fascination. I'll tell you, I just last night was at the movies. I try and go at least once a week, and I noticed how often I'm seeing the archetype of the outcast at the movies. There's something happening in our cinematic storytelling right now that we've become quite fascinated with the idea of those that are pushed beyond the boundaries, those who have not been able to assimilate within a particular culture or society or way of thinking. And I think there's something really interesting to be explored there. Well, I am going to go ahead and transition us to a bit of introduction here around some of the people that are joining us to put this webinar on. And I'm so thankful for each and every member of the team here at JCF. We've got Jason Batt, who is handling our IT wizardry, and Jason is amazing at helping us with technology. We've got Stephen Geringer, and Stephen is our community coordinator. Stephen is helping us engage with you in a number of different ways, and you'll be seeing Stephen's work later here in the webinar. We'll be engaging with you in different ways. Teddy Hamstra, that is our works in our research and development, and Teddy is actually the captain of the chat today. So he's going to be dropping all sorts of things into the chat that we hope will be helpful to you in further engaging into this material. So you'll be seeing Teddy serving us in that way. I'm John Booker. I'm the executive director of the Joseph Campbell Foundation. But we also have members of the Joseph Campbell Foundation's leadership team that you're going to be getting to meet today. And the first is Stephanie Zachowski. And Stephanie is our director of operations. She's also an incredible mythologist with incredible thinking around the mythological that you're going to get to experience some of Stephanie's brilliance today. Brad Olson is our director of publications. And Brad is hard at work at bringing Joseph Campbell's work through the various publications that the foundation engages in. You're going to be hearing from Brad today as well. And finally, Joanna Gardner, our Director of Marketing and Communications, who's going to be joining us today to help us unpack and explore a particular avenue of these archetypes in the movies. So thank you so much, JCF team. I'm so glad that you are a part of this today in helping us bring this material out to everyone who's joining us today. So now what I would like to do is check in with Teddy, who I introduced just a moment ago. And Teddy, I would love to hear what's going on in the chat. Who's here today? Who are we engaging with?
Thank you so much, John. We have guests checking in from Mexico, Argentina, Nicaragua, Turkey, all the way from northwestern Canada to Cape Town, South Africa, the east coast of the US, to Vietnam, Berlin, Romania, the American Southwest, Los Angeles, where I'm at. It's just great to see everybody here. We have a lot of Lokis, tricksters, fools, outcasts, creators checking in. I think the trickster energy is very fitting given that this webinar is happening just after a little bit of a trickster event in the skies, that lunar eclipse that hopefully everyone got to see recently. And we have people talking about, the animated work of Miyazaki to the TV show Severance and the work of George Miller and Northern Exposure. So there's a lot of great stuff happening in the chat, and I'll be continuing to drop some links. And thank you everybody for joining us all around the world.
Thanks so much, Teddy. And I'm excited to go back and read the chat and get little notes of some of the shows and movies that I want to go back and watch now as well. I'd like to introduce and bring in Stephanie Zachowski now so that we can transition into this time of talking about some specific archetypes in cinema. So Stephanie, welcome. Maybe you could share a little bit with us about the archetype of the Fool.
Love it. Love it. Absolutely. Thank you, John, and for that warm welcome. And I want to extend it to all of you as well for taking a moment of your day today for us to sit here and explore some archetypes and some other exciting things. So it's wonderful to be here. As John introduced, the Joseph Campbell Foundation is focusing on myth in the movies this year. And we started the year off with the Fool archetype, which is fitting because the Fool is all about beginnings. And when I think of the Fool, the movie that comes to mind for me immediately, as John mentioned, is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. That moment when Harrison Ford stands at the edge of that vast canyon and he can't see a bridge to cross it, yet with foolish courage, what he calls a leap of faith, he takes that step anyway. And I can remember the way I felt in the movie theater that day watching this moment. Even though it was over 30 years ago, it's like it was yesterday. The way my stomach clenched as his foot dangled from the canyon, the feeling of the adrenaline rush as he took that first step, and just the elation as that path appeared before him. Something that wasn't there before all of a sudden was there. That was exhilarating for me. So that feeling, that is the Fool archetype at play in the movies. And as that movie shows, the foolish courage that Harrison Ford or Indiana Jones portrayed can lead someone to greatness. So the Fool archetype offers many powers and possibilities. We're just going to talk about a few today, but courage and daring are the first ones. The Fool embarks into the unknown with curiosity and an openness to possibility. And that takes courage. The Fool does not know where they're headed. There is no map. There's no planning, no strategy. That's not the Fool. The Fool just takes the step and daringly goes anyway into the unknown. So the Fool learns by doing. The Fool learns through action. And the possibility inherent in such acts of daring is that one's life expands to meet one's courage. The Fool finds opportunities that did not exist before. Another power of the Fool is audacity. The Fool is known for standing up to the status quo. They carry with them an intuitive intelligence, as we all do, but the Fool honors this intuitive intelligence above all else. And in so doing, the Fool often speaks truth to power through audacious acts or pushing boundaries. The Fool brings humor into the space of authority and often introduces the unsaid or the unseen, sometimes where it's not welcome at all. So if we listen to the Fool, there's the possibility for the Fool to awaken and expand our consciousness. So those are some of the gifts of the Fool archetype. There are many. As with all archetypes, there are also some pitfalls and some perils. And so we're going to touch on a few of those today too. When we think of that word foolish, it has a certain meaning for us. It's not always positive. And with the Fool archetype, there is always a chance that we're going to fall on our face. Errors abound with the Fool. There's always the chance, but there's also the chance for opportunity. Another pitfall is pain. So the Fool honors intuition at all costs. And sometimes this hurts others around us, especially ones who don't see the wisdom in our courage. And finally, there is the peril of danger. Courage in and of itself is dangerous terrain, and danger is present in the Fool archetype in equal measure with its possibility. So as we finish up on the Fool here today in our little moment of highlighting it, I have a quote from Joseph Campbell from Creative Mythology, which John said we're going to continue talking about today. And we think this quote really highlights the power of the Fool archetype. Campbell states that the will and courage to credit one's own senses and to honor one's own decisions, to name one's own virtues, and to claim one's own vision of truth have been the generative forces of the new age. So the Fool invites us to trust our intuition and to dare to live our own very unique lives and to live those lives fully. For as Campbell tells us here, to live in such a way is generative. It brings us new life. So if you'd like to explore the Fool a bit more with us, you can check out some of our myth blasts that were highlighted in January. And it goes over the presence of the Fool archetype in movies. I believe Teddy's going to drop those links in the chat for you to check out and read some more. And I know there's already been some Fools entering the chat, but if any others pop up for you and you want to share those in the chat, please feel welcome to do that and let us all kind of join in the fun of the conversation in the chat around archetypal presences in our movies. And that is all the time we have today for the Fool. So I'm going to pass the virtual microphone over to Joanna to tell us a bit about the Lover archetype. Joanna?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Steph. That was wonderful. I loved that. So the archetype of the month in February here at the Joseph Campbell Foundation was the lover at the movies in honor of Valentine's Day. And I'm actually going to talk a little bit about the lover through the myth blasts that we published. The first one that we published in February was Bradley Olson's essay called My She Was Yar, about the lover and the 1940 film The Philadelphia Story, which shows the individuation of two very classy lovers, Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant, with some strong support from Jimmy Stewart. And in this essay, Brad writes, and I'm quoting here, "Love is the inducement to individuation, to becoming who one is," right? Love is the inducement or the invitation, right, to individuation, becoming who one is. I just really appreciated that. The second myth blast that we published in February was Stephanie Zachowski's, Stephanie who just spoke, and her essay was called Desire Along the Witch's Road, about the character Agatha Harkness in the Marvel Universe series Agatha All Along. The myth blast opens, appropriately enough, with an invocation of the goddess Aphrodite, the goddess of love in ancient Greece. Then it traces the energy of love as it intertwines with death to bring forth new life. Stephanie writes in this essay that the lover archetype, and this is a quote, "The lover archetype seduces us towards that which makes us feel most alive." Seduces us towards that which makes us feel most alive. The third of our myth blasts for the month was Christina Drazes, who wrote about the sci-fi thriller The Adjustment Bureau in her myth blast called Love Meets Fate and Destiny at the Movies. And this essay portrays, I'll say it highlights the age-old conflict between fate on the one hand and free will on the other hand. And one of the things I love most about this essay is how Christina highlights the love of one's fate, right? Or amor fati, as Joseph Campbell often referenced it, or bringing one of the key skills of the lover archetype to whatever happens to you, right? Loving what happens to you, loving your own life, or even romancing your own life, right? And then we closed out the month with Tori Yates Orr's Myth Blast called To All the Lovers Lost and Found, about the lover in the film Before Sunset. Tori points out in this essay how the lover archetype can function as a guide to growing through relationships, regardless of their outcome, a guide to what Tori calls the lover's walk through the deaths and rebirths of love, and a guide to answering the perennial question of love, which is, do I dare? Right? Do I dare? So to sum up, the Myth Blast for the month of February covered the lover as an invitation to individuation, right, in Brad's, to feeling alive, to loving your own life, and to deciding whether, when, and how to answer the question, do I dare? And so the powers and possibilities of the lover archetype, in addition to these, include, just beautiful gifts like care, compassion, joy, and of course, love. Also connection, companionship, all these wonderful things. The pitfalls and perils of the lover archetype include projection, or seeing the other person not as who they really are, but as who we imagine them to be or maybe want them to be. Also, loss of self, possibly impulsiveness, possibly jealousy, right? All archetypes have many, many sides. In Creative Mythology, Campbell writes the following, and this is a quote: "The sense experienced by lovers of having discovered in the world without the perfect complement of their own truth, and so of a marvelous coincidence thereby of destiny and chance, inner and external worlds may conduce to the poetic conviction of an accord universal of the seen and the unseen." In other words, love can be so magical, such a powerful blessing, that it can make you feel an inner alignment with the divine or the sacred. So I would love to offer the chat prompt for you to enter into the chat some of your favorite movies with the lover archetype. I couldn't possibly speak to the lover archetype without mentioning The Princess Bride, which makes constant fun of love at the same time as it kind of surrenders completely, maybe even blissfully, to its own spell of romance. So what other lovers come to mind for you? Go ahead and type them into the chat. And while you do that, I will hand the virtual microphone to Brad to talk about the Trickster. Brad?
Hi, thanks for that, Joanna. That was great, and Stephanie too. I really enjoyed your excursions into these archetypes, and it's so nice to see everybody out there. What a treat this is to be here this morning. When we talk about the trickster, there is, I think, a lot of overlap. The trickster seems to have some qualities of the fool, some qualities of the lover, and I think the ubiquity of the trickster is one of the reasons for its power and its popularity. Let's look at some of the power and possibilities of the trickster. There's fun, there's laughter, there's new ideas, communication, messages. Trickster gods are often the psychopomps. They conduct souls of the newly dead to the underworld, and the gods of travel. Hermes is a trickster who's also the god of communication. He's also the god of liars and the god of commerce. And all of those things overlap and connect. And you see in some of the pitfalls and perils of the trickster, these ideas that sort of put the shadow on displays, the dark underworld. There's the deceit, the god of liars thing, the theft, loss, disruption. The trickster according to Jung, is aligned with the shadow. The shadow is the summation of all the inferior character traits found in individuals. And while the shadow is almost by definition a negative figure, it has some clearly discernible traits and associations that in fact are quite creative and positive and qualities that function as strengths. And the shadow hides these qualities under this initial appearance. But the things that are hidden, Jung says, usually consist of increasingly numinous figures. And so you begin to see the transformative creative gifts that the trickster often displays. These are also found in the shadow. I think that the trickster is a figure of liminality. This is the realm of the dimly perceived. The threshold the trickster often holds is that threshold between the collective and the individual. It's the threshold between consciousness and unconsciousness. And this is why the trickster appears to be so paradoxical in nature. He's creatively destructive. She's impulsive yet purposeful. They're divinely endowed, and yet they display the most immoral, decadent, malevolent behaviors that you can find in this human pageant. So Campbell saw the trickster as that figure that breaks in as the unconscious does, to trip up the rational situation. The tricksters has this role in disrupting established orders and challenging conventional norms, and brings with her these startlingly new perspectives and possibilities. And they're often multitaskers, these tricksters. They're doing many, many, many things at once. Disrupting, creating, destroying, the clever use of language, this liminality again, that sort of, it not only brings consciousness to the unconscious, it also brings unconsciousness to consciousness. And so there's this marvelous interplay and interflow of image and ideas that are constantly emerging and sinking below the surface of consciousness. The quote from Creative Mythology that we chose for the trickster is that the trickster restores to existence the quality of adventure, at once shattering and reintegrating the fixed, already known, in the sacrificial creative fire of the becoming thing that is no thing at all, but life, not as it will be or as it should be, but as it is, in process, here and now, inside out. And that, is Campbell at his best. This beautiful capturing of the complexity and the beauty and the poetry of this archetypal image that has its resonances in so many realms, in so many parts of the collective, and in so much of the individual. And it's an extraordinary thing. And I think that's why it is so popular. And as you look at the chat, you see this plethora of tricksters and tricksterish themes. And it's a delight to see, and it's a delight to be able to share some of these thoughts with you. And with that, I'll hand the mic back over to John.
Thank you so much, Brad. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Steph. I am really in awe of all the ideas that are being brought forth about these archetypes. I'm equally in awe of the amazing discussion that's happening in the chat as far as the examples that people are bringing to light. I encourage you throughout the webinar to keep thinking of these expressions in cinema of these archetypes and dropping those into the chat, because I've already made several notes of several films that I want to go back and watch and see how that expression of that archetype comes to play. Brad mentioned in his quote from Creative Mythology that we have chosen this book to emphasize during this time here at the Joseph Campbell Foundation. And I tell you, if you haven't read Creative Mythology, you really are missing some of Campbell's amazing work for artists, especially. Now, I think this book is helpful to anyone, but I really believe that this is a book that especially is applicable to artists, because Campbell goes deep on the use of symbols and signs and the way that these things are expressed in society today. And if that is a medium you work in, if you work with metaphor, if you're just interested in exploring signs, symbols, metaphor, I think Creative Mythology is a book that you really don't want to miss. But don't go buy it right now, because we've again got a promo code that's going to be coming up at the end of the webinar that will help you out there if you plan to buy it today. So make sure that you hold off on buying it until the end of the webinar, because we have something special for you that we'd like to give you as a gift. So hold that thought for just a second if you're thinking about buying it. We'll circle back to that in just a few moments. But right now, what I'd like to do is bring back in our guest speaker for the webinar, Joseph Campbell himself. Let's hear a little bit more from Joseph Campbell. He's going to say something in this particular clip that he explores in greater detail in Creative Mythology about the gods being within us. So let's see that clip.
The main thing for people today are these religions of contemplation and meditation,
Yes.
recognizing within you the powers that are those of the gods. You know, all the gods are simply projections of human potentialities. They're not out there. They're not out there. They're in here. That word, the kingdom of heaven is within you, is a good word. And who's in heaven? God is. So where is he? Look in here. You have two kinds of religion, that which is addressed outward like that, and that which is turned inward here.
We will be giving you a bit more information about this particular interview that happened. This is an exciting thing that we're sharing with you today. And no one, I'm guessing, on this webinar has seen this interview before, and we're really excited to be able to present it today. So we'll be giving a bit more information about that a little later in the webinar. But what I'd like to do right now is invite the rest of the team back in, and I'd like to check in with all of you. I know that you've been putting questions in the Q&A for our discussion, and Stephen, I know you've been tracking the questions that people have been putting into the Q&A, and I would love to see what people are discussing or what they would like to hear us discuss here in the Q&A. So Stephen, if you could join us here center stage and tell us what questions are coming in that we could talk about.
Well, we don't have many yet. People have been paying attention to the chat, but what we have so far are kind of meta questions, like basic stuff. Can you define an archetype? What's the difference between an archetype and a trope?
What a great question! And while others are putting questions into the Q&A or the chat, I wonder if maybe we could have Joanna, Brad, and Steph just briefly address that question, because I feel like this is one of those questions that deserves more than just one simple answer. There are angles as to what an archetype is. So maybe Joanna, we could start with you. And what comes to mind for you? What comes up for you when you think about how to define or differentiate an archetype from these different other expressions?
Yeah, thank you, John, and thank you for the question, whoever offered it. I want to echo Brad's appreciation of everything that's going on in the chat. It's just so great to see everyone here, to see everyone engaged and bringing these ideas to life. And so the first thing, to get to the question, the first thing that comes up for me thinking about archetypes versus tropes, I would want to double check this, but what comes up first, I feel like tropes are a superset of archetypes. Like an archetype is a trope, but tropes can be any kind of repeating motif in narrative, right? Whereas archetypes, typically, I'm going to say this, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like archetypes are often personified, right? They're often characters. They're a character who shows a kind of repeating constellation of traits or powers or potentialities, like we've talked about with the slides. So I see archetypes most often in characters, like I said, and tropes can be, tropes can be more general. Tropes can include, the trope of the lost letter, the trope of, something that isn't necessarily a character, right? John, back to you.
Wonderful. Absolutely. Thank you, Joanna. Brad, how about you? What comes up for you when you think about this differentiation?
Well, for me, one of the differentiations is that, again, going back to Jung, he conceived the idea that archetypes are universal, whereas tropes don't have that kind of universality necessarily. And the other thing about archetypes is that they seem to arise from psyche. And I suppose, when we start to talk about arising from psyche, this is a kind of a biological link, in fact, and Campbell talks about this as well in various places. And so you get the this kind of skeletal form that kind of comes with our biological inheritance of this idea or image that we call an archetype. And then our life experience fills it in. It puts meat on those bones, so to speak. Whereas, tropes are sort of developed as a literary device and a storytelling device.
Wonderful, Brad. Thank you. Thank you. Steph, how about you? What comes up for you when you think about this differentiation?
Yeah, these are excellent ideas, Joanna and Brad. And I just mirroring a little bit, I think that archetypes they cohere around an image or an idea. It's kind of this energy coherence of patterns, and they're ever changing. I think it's important to consider that archetypes are always moving and fluid. Where I see stereotypes as kind of a simplification, if we're looking at tropes and things of that nature. So to me, tropes contract and archetypes expand us. I think those are the key, kind of what Campbell was talking about in that very first excerpt. They're expansive.
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, I really agree. I feel like oftentimes tropes, attempt to narrow down an experience to something that we can wrap our head around, where archetypes open up an experience or an expression of something. So there's sort of a different movement of energy with each one of those things. Stephen, I see more questions are coming into our Q&A. So what else are people wondering about?
They are rolling in. This one I find particularly intriguing. What are some of the most interesting ways that today's cinema have been playing with these archetypes? And are there trends in how these archetypes have been changing for our times that you can speak to?
You know, I'm going to actually invite Stephanie in to talk a little bit about this, but as she prepares to think of examples maybe of how this might have come in, I'm going to speak to it here briefly. I feel like one of the ways cinema has been playing with this began a number of years ago, and it was influenced by television when television became tremendously fascinated with the idea of the anti-hero. And we started to see the ideas of archetypes changing in our culture and moving as characters like Tony Soprano and Walter White came to the forefront of discussions of characters in American media. And with those characters, we started to see people not just understand the depths of them, but start to view them in a near heroic way. So we started to see these typical anti-hero characters be viewed in heroic ways. But I think that we are also seeing a great expansion and exploration of female characters in cinema today and the archetypes that we see them fit into. Steph, I wonder, does that bring anything up for you? Have you seen anything in the movies the last few years that you feel like is maybe an expansion of archetypes for women?
Oh, for women. Yeah. Well, I was nodding my head because I was thinking it was so interesting of your collective journey and that pattern and Marvel and all of these things. That's been something really present in women. That's interesting. Well, what came to mind immediately, I just finished watching, which is not a movie, but Paradise, which is another kind of apocalyptic show. I always find this interesting, these kind of chewing on endings and reinventions and what that looks like. And when we distill humanity down to these kind of essences, what can we create in these spaces? I always think that's quite interesting. Heroines and female. Oh, I'm just gonna let me think on that for a little bit.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Steph. This is a question. I feel like any one of these questions we could probably spend the entire session just going deep on. Stephen, what's another question someone has brought forward?
Well, there's a question about the writer's journey by Christopher Vogler. Is the material we're covering similar to that? And would you recommend that work?
You know, I don't want to take the microphone from anyone else, but I have spent a lot of time with the writer's journey, and Chris Vogler, full disclosure, is a good friend of mine, so I want to be able to speak to this, and I'll say this. Christopher Vogler is a very big fan of Joseph Campbell and is someone who has greatly credited, Campbell for the work that's in that book. And yes, the writer's journey does go deep on a lot of these things. Where I would differentiate just a bit is Chris Vogler's writer's journey is really greatly focused around the plot or the movement of a character throughout the film. And what we're talking about, with these archetypes are the characters themselves and the depth of character development. So while I do recommend Chris Vogler's writer's journey, I don't recommend it in place of Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces. You have to read that first if you really want to get the most out of Vogler's writer's journey. But also, there is an entire new school of cinematic thinking around Jungian cinema or Jungian cinema studies. And this is a community that has risen up greatly out of Europe. And the Jungian cinematic community has really went deep on the exploration of archetypes within cinema. So if you're looking to expand your understanding of archetypes in cinema, I'd recommend probably going over to some of these books from the Jungian cinematic community. And there are a number of books to start with. There's two collections, one called Jung in Film, and then another called Jung in Film 2, that are good starting places, and the writers and thinkers in both of those books then have done their own books that you should definitely check out. There's also a massive handbook from Routledge on Jungian cinematic theory and Jungian cinema, and it just very much aligns with all of Campbell's ideas. So I think if you're looking for archetypes, that's the place to start. I don't want to keep anyone else out of the discussion. Does anyone else on the team have anything to add to that? Please, Joanna.
Yeah, thanks, John. I just wanted to add, in addition, like if we're coming up with a reading list for film and archetypes, for sure the writer's journey. I want to underscore and second John's recommendation of the writer's journey, and add some books that focus on female characters, like Jane Eyre's Sisters by Jodi Bauer. I loved that book, and The Virgin's Promise by Kim Hudson. And I would add Maureen Murdoch's The Heroine's Journey as well. Basically, like, yes, absolutely read the writer's journey and don't stop reading. Keep going, because there's so much wonderful stuff out there.
Just to add one thought to Joanna's there also is a tremendous Jungian scholar named Helena Basil Morazel, and we'll try and put that in the chat. She's written a great deal about female character archetypes, and she also has a really great book I'm going to hold up. Well, you're not going to see it well here, but it's called Jungian Theory for Storytellers, a Toolkit. And I really recommend Helena's book and her work. It's really, really excellent. So hopefully that gives some thoughts to that question. Stephen, another question for us.
All right. Well, noticing that questions are beginning to veer away from the movies and into how archetypes work in our personal lives, which of course is part of why we're doing this in the Myth Blast, to bring it back from the film to us too as individuals. So I'm trying in my mind to combine a couple questions, since we won't be able to get to everyone. Here's one from Marie and Jason. Can individuals embody multiple archetypes at once, or do we typically only have one primary archetype throughout life? Which I'm going to, we have a question from Nathaniel about these three archetypes. Are they interrelated? Are they found in one character? I notice a resonance between those questions, one related to the movie and one related to our own lives. And then a tag along to that, why did we choose these three for this webinar?
That I would love to have Brad offer the answer on the first part of that question, and then invite Joanna to speak to the second part of that question. So, Brad, what do you think?
So give me the first part of that question again, Stephen.
Okay. Bouncing around can an individual embody multiple archetypes at once, or do we have one primary archetype? And I'm relating that to a different question related to what we're discussing. Are the three, and I think you touched on this, lover, fool, trickster, can they be found in one character?
Yeah. Well, let's take that first part. And no, we don't simply have one archetype that we're assigned to, when we're born, when we're, introduced into the world. I mean, it's important to think of the archetypes as a particular effect upon us by the archetypal. And so there's this like archetypal realm, right, where we see the world in through symbol and metaphor and things like that. And a given archetype is sort of the manifest effect of the archetypal influence. And so you can experience a lot of different archetypes. And we do regularly. I'm a parent. I'm also a child. I'm a, I have um, the experience of joy and suffering and pain that we all have. And all of those things are intertwined. And so often these archetypes will overlap. And for me, it's important not to focus so much on the archetype as the archetypal. And this is, I think, focusing on the archetype takes us into places we don't necessarily want to go. And of course, um, everybody has their favorite archetype. And if we think that our favorite archetype is the one that's most influential to us, I would say that's probably not true. And what I find in the consulting room is that in fact it's just the opposite. The archetype that you want to avoid most is probably the archetype that's exerting some powerful influence on you.
So good. Thank you for that, Brad. And just for the sake of time, I want to have Joanna speak to why these particular archetypes were chosen. And then we might have time for one more question before we need to move forward. So Joanna.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, John. And thank you, Brad, for that answer. I think it's such an important distinction between archetype and archetypal. The noun, the reified thing versus the adjective, the way of being, the way of seeing, the way of experiencing the sacred. So why we chose these three archetypes for this particular webinar is that these three archetypes are the first three archetypes that we are covering in a course that the Campbell Foundation is teaching in partnership with roundtable.org, which is the online version of the 92nd Street Y in New York. The course is called, let me get this right, the course is called Mythic Archetypes of Innocence. And the course actually covers 4 archetypes: Trickster, Lover, Seeker, and Fool. And so the first 3 archetypes in that course are the Fool, the Lover, and the Trickster, right? The order that we did today. And then the 4th session of that course will be held in April, and that will be about the Seeker. And so the Seeker is actually going to be the Campbell Foundation's archetype for the month of April. So you'll see myth blasts about the Seeker, and you can still register for the roundtable.org course. The previous sessions are recorded, and there will be one more live session. Wait, no, 2 more live sessions, right? 2 more live sessions. Thank you. So yeah, did I cover everything, John? We might want to get the URL into the chat.
I believe Teddy's already got it in there for us.
Yeah, so that was the long answer. The short answer is Archetypes of Innocence is the category that they fall under.
Thanks so much, Joanna. Appreciate that. And Stephen, let's try and get to one more question. So what do you have for us?
Certainly. Final question. How intentional on the part of writers and directors and actors are the use of archetypes in film? Surely they haven't all read Campbell and you.
You know what? I am going to for this last question. We have 2 other voices here on screen that I want a chance to hear from just a bit. Jason, aside from handling our web duties and being a tech genius, is also a PhD mythologist, someone that has a deep background in science fiction, especially. And Teddy is actually just months away from completing his PhD, which focuses on Joseph Campbell. So I wonder if maybe the 2 of them might be open to speaking to this. I know I'm putting you on the spot, guys, but Jason, what comes up for you when you think about this question?
Well, I actually go back to, I think, something that Joanna said, that these are, figures that are very apparent. They're very obvious. But yet what's unique is then when we go back to what Brad said, that, pointing back to Jung said that the archetypes emerge. These are things that are built deeply within the collective unconscious. And you're right, most people aren't reading Campbell. Most people are not reading Jung. And what's remarkable is that these archetypes will still appear, because that these are aspects of the collective unconscious. They take different forms, but the archetypal energy is still there. It's still constant. One thing that Campbell often talks about is that it's the artist who gives form to this very archetypal energy, that out of that is how myth is actually formed, that they are there, they're present. To be honest, artists will be forever writing and creating things and simultaneously creating things that represent these archetypes. And I think someone asked, well, how are these cultural? They'll give a cultural inflection to them, they'll give a cultural variation to them. But at the same time, it's the archetypes because they're deep in us, whether they read Campbell or Jung or anyone else.
Ah, so good, Jason. Thank you so much for that. Teddy, how about you? What comes up for you?
You know, John, I would just point us back to Campbell's own development when he was kind of pursuing a PhD, and he was in Paris and other parts of Europe in the 1920s, and he was watching modernism in the arts, particularly the visual arts, unfold as he was doing these really deep studies of Arthurian myth and the troubadour traditions. And so Campbell got to see modern troubadours in the forms of James Joyce publishing Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake, and Pablo Picasso and the art galleries of Paris. And he also eventually lived with an artist himself, Jean Erdmann, his creative and romantic partner. And so I think that understanding his interest in art really comes from a really formative moment in his own life.
So good. Teddy, thank you for that. We've got a ton of questions actually that have come into the Q&A, and just know we do save these questions, and we do try and reach out and get back with some answers on some of these things when and if possible. So we will hold on to these. There seems to be a ton of interest in this particular topic, so we'll continue to look for ways to answer these questions. But I do want to go ahead and move us forward into some very exciting announcements. So I know some of you have been waiting for some of these announcements, including a promo code that's coming. So I'd like to go ahead and move forward into the first announcement if we can. And that announcement has to do with something that I believe many of you have a great interest in, and it's the power of myth. For the first time in history, there is a Blu-ray version of The Power of Myth available. And if you just go out and Google Power of Myth Blu-ray, it's available on a number of different platforms wherever you typically buy media. There's some new special bonus features there that you don't want to miss. Also, if you are not looking to buy The Power of Myth, but would like to watch it again, it is currently streaming on a number of PBS stations, such as 13.org. And if you have any sort of membership to PBS, you can watch those amazing episodes. And it will be coming back to YouTube, so we will keep you posted on that. Right now, it's not available on YouTube because this Blu-ray has been released, and so it's not available on YouTube at this moment, but it will be coming back to YouTube, so we'll keep you posted on that. If you're looking for more Campbell, however, I highly recommend that you check out our podcasts. We have two incredible podcasts that are original productions of the Joseph Campbell Foundation. One is Pathways with Joseph Campbell, and you get to hear an entire Campbell lecture in every episode. Brad Olson, who you've got to meet today, then gives commentary. He introduces the lecture, gives you lots of insights about what the lecture is. That particular podcast has new episodes dropping in June, so get caught up on Pathways with Joseph Campbell and then listen for those new episodes. We've also got the podcast with 1,000 Faces. We have a new episode dropping April 1st with Francis Weller, and you do not want to miss it. It's just incredible. Many of you, speaking of video, have been asking about this video that we've been playing segments of. This is a video that has not been shown publicly ever. and it's an interview between Joseph Campbell and Jeffrey Mishlove, and it was recorded on February 16th, 1987 for Thinking Aloud Productions. And we are so excited to announce that after this webinar, we're making the entire video available for free on YouTube. You can watch this incredible conversation between Jeffrey Mishlove and Joseph Campbell. You'll also receive the link via email as soon as we send out the webinar recording. So definitely check out this unheard, unseen video from Joseph Campbell that we're so excited about. Finally, I know you've been waiting for it. Here is the promo code we're offering. It's Myth Magic. And with this promo code, you can get $5 off any purchase with an ebook at jcf.org/shop. It's only good through March 22nd. But if you want to buy Creative Mythology as an ebook, it's $9.99. We're giving you $5 off. That's 50% off, half off for any ebook that you're trying to buy, but it's $5 off any purchase that has an ebook in it at jcf.org/shop. So very excited to offer you this rare opportunity to come and get a big discount on some of the things that we offer here at the Joseph Campbell Foundation. I want to thank everyone for being a part of this webinar today. We're so appreciative. I think what we'd like to do here is give the last word today to Joseph Campbell. So one final clip from that interview between Joseph Campbell and Jeffrey Mishlove. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. We've got other webinars coming up this year, so please come back and join us. We really appreciate your support of the Joseph Campbell Foundation. Take it away, Joseph Campbell.
How do you find the divine power in yourself? You know? The word enthusiasm means filled with the God. That's what it means. So, what makes you enthusiastic? Follow it. That's been my advice to young people asking, what shall I do? I taught once in a prep school, boys' prep school. That's the moment for young boys, or it used to be, I don't know what's going on now, when they had to decide their life courses, you know, where are they going? And they're caught with excitement. This one wants to study art, this one poetry, this one anthropology, but Dad says study law, that's where the money is. Okay, that's the decision. And you know what my answer would be, where your enthusiasm is. So I have a little word, follow your bliss. The bliss is the message of God to yourself. That's where your life is.